Gong Meilin planned an assault. Her target, the kindergarten at the street corner. Weapons, escape routes, negotiation dialogue. She had rehearsed every detail 1,000 times. When the gun pressed against the temple of the child and the trigger was pulled, what spilled out was not bullets, but a flurry of photographs. When I arrived at the police station, Gong Meilin was sobbing uncontrollably, her face streaked with tears as she clutched her head, repeatedly apologizing. The victim, still holding her child tightly, looked at her on the ground with a mixture of wariness and anger. Gong Meilin had lost control at the mall, seizing someone else's child and clinging to them desperately. She didn't let go until the child let out a startled cry, snapping her back to reality. She stood there, stunned, before finally releasing the child. By the time she regained her senses, she was already in the back of a police car. Unable to explain her actions, she could only apologize over and over again. The child, still in their mother's arms, peeked out and gently touched Gong Meilin's head with a tiny hand. "Auntie, don't cry." Gong Meilin froze before collapsing onto the floor in a flood of tears. I knew Gong Meilin. We'd met before at a charity event for Purple Ribbon Mothers. That day, she had been much like she was now, kneeling on the ground, weeping and begging for help. Most of the attendees were mothers whose children had been abducted. They understood her pain, but there was little they could do. I stood at the podium with stacks of pamphlets and years' worth of case files. Each page was a story of a mother's grief and desperation. At that moment, those stories seemed to condense into the tears streaming down Gong Meilin's face, dripping from her tired features and landing heavily in the hearts of every mother present. I wanted to help her up but hesitated, unsure of the right words or gestures. I knew that as long as her child was missing, Gong Meilin's soul would remain on its knees. After the event ended, she managed to compose herself. Still tear-streaked, she approached me with a bow. "I'm sorry, Ms. Lin, for causing such a scene today. I'm just so desperate." Her voice broke, and she began to cry again. I reached out and embraced her, gently patting her back. "I understand. I do." Through her thin summer clothes, I felt something uneven on her back. My hand lingered, then traced downward, and I realized her back was covered in raised scars. It was after that encounter that I began following Gong Meilin's story, expanding my interviews to cover the entire group she represented. Gong Meilin was born into a working-class family. Her parents were honest and hardworking, and she herself was diligent, landing a job as an accountant after graduating from university. Her 9-to-5 routine was steady and fulfilling. Gong Meilin was the epitome of the unassuming urbanite, expecting a life of marriage, children, and a shared commitment to building a family. She carefully charted her path, avoiding risks wherever she could. But life doesn't follow plans, and everything fell apart during the summer of 2015. With a bitter expression, she turned to me and said, "Ms. Lin, I've only seen winter twice in my memory. Once was when my family moved south. I leaned out of the car window to say goodbye to my friends, and snowflakes landed on my lashes, blurring my vision until all I could see was white. The second time was in the summer of 2015. I was on my knees in the street, banging my head against the pavement, begging anyone who'd listen if they'd seen my Huan. Blood trickled from my forehead into my eyes. It's funny, isn't it? Blood should be red, but all I saw was white, like I was back in that childhood winter, with snow all around me. Gong Meilin was trapped in that day. Trapped in the freezing winter of midsummer. I watched the video of Gong Meilin's wedding. Balloons, flowers, streamers, congratulations, and laughter filled the air. Dressed in a white gown, she walked down the red carpet arm in arm with her husband, smiling radiantly at their families and guests. Yongyu recited his vows to the priest. Whether in poverty or wealth, sickness or health, beauty or frailty, joy or sorrow, I will love her, comfort her, respect her, and protect her for as long as I live. Yongyu's parents, simple farmers, had wanted a lively, traditional ceremony back in their hometown. But Gong Meilin had her own vision, a wedding on a grassy field with a priest and a banquet. Despite his parents' objections, Yongyu gave her the romantic ceremony she dreamed of. As Yongyu took her hand, tears streamed down Gong Meilin's face, shining as brightly as the wedding rings they exchanged. Years later, she would often clutch my hands and ask me, over and over, "Ms. Lin, how could he be so heartless after being so sincere that day?" She had orchestrated a grand, fairy tale wedding. But married life was no fairy tale. Day by day, the relentless chores and inescapable drudgery of life began to weigh her down. Gong Meilin started to sense Yongyu's growing indifference and neglect. Their first explosive argument erupted over something as trivial as a single bowl left out of the sink. "It's ridiculous, isn't it?" she asked me, tears in her eyes. Just a bowl, and we had a screaming match and smashed everything breakable in the house. Her tear-filled eyes met mine, and I felt an ache in my chest. Ridiculous? Maybe. On the surface, it seemed like an overreaction. A wife nagging her husband over a misplaced dish. Wasn't that just nitpicking? But I couldn't laugh. In all my interviews with married women, these small things were the building blocks of their suffering, the constant background noise of their unhappiness. But Gong Meilin was young, too young to see through Yongyu's irresponsibility. Their conflicts were swept aside by the joy of new life. Gong Meilin was pregnant. When they learned the news, the couple celebrated with a candlelit dinner. Moved by emotion, Yongyu knelt before her, resting his head on her lap. "I'm sorry," he said. "I'll never make you angry again. If it's a girl, I'll protect you both. If it's a boy, we'll protect you together." As she stroked his hair, prickly stubble tickling her palm, her heart filled with warmth. It was a cliched promise, but it touched her deeply. For a while after that, their relationship seemed to improve. The young couple was happy again. But Gong Meilin failed to notice the subtle changes creeping in, like rice that looks clean and fresh on the surface, but up close, carries the sour smell of decay. 10 months of pregnancy, 1 day of childbirth. In the delivery room, Gong Meilin screamed as if her body was being torn apart, each breath sharp with pain. "Stop screaming," the doctor said harshly. "Save your strength for delivering the baby. If you waste it all now, how are you going to push later?" "Please, doctor. I want a C-section. I want an epidural. I'm begging you." Gong Meilin stammered through the unbearable pain coursing through every nerve in her body, converging in her brain with such force that her temples throbbed violently. She had no memory of how long she struggled before finally getting the epidural. When she was wheeled out of the delivery room, she saw her parents wiping tears while cooing over the baby. "What's wrong?" She wanted to crack a joke to lighten the mood, but she was too exhausted to do more than whisper. "Nothing, nothing," her mother replied, turning her back to keep playing with the baby. A mother's heart aches to see her child suffer. That night, as the anesthetic wore off, Gong Meilin couldn't sleep from the pain. Her mother sat by her bed, holding her hand and massaging it. Looking into her mother's reddening eyes, Gong Meilin saw tears pooling at the corners, hanging there, ready to fall. When the tear finally fell, landing on Gong Meilin's hand, it strangely soothed her pain. "If you're not happy, then leave him," her mother said, her voice trembling. "Your father and I are still capable of working, and we have pensions. We can take care of you and the baby. You were raised by your grandmother when you were little, and I never got the chance to take care of a child. Let me have that chance now." Gong Meilin turned her head, pretending to look at the baby. She didn't dare meet her mother's gaze, afraid that she would start crying too. "Where's Yongyu?" I couldn't help but interject. It was hard to imagine a woman who had just given birth without her husband by her side. Gong Meilin let out a self-deprecating laugh. "He's sleeping in the car downstairs. He said the hospital smells too much like disinfectant, and it disrupts his rest." She paused before adding, "Teacher Lin, my mom is a very traditional woman. I never thought she would ever suggest divorce. She didn't tell me the truth at first, probably afraid I'd get upset. I only found out later from my dad." During labor, things weren't going smoothly for Gong Meilin. She struggled for a long time without progress until the doctor issued a grim warning. If they didn't perform a C-section soon, both mother and child would be at serious risk. But Yongyu stubbornly refused to allow an epidural or a C-section, claiming it would harm the baby and accusing the doctors of fear-mongering. Unable to take it anymore, Gong Meilin's mother finally lost her temper. Only then did Yongyu reluctantly admit the truth. "We can't get reimbursement for this." Furious, Gong Meilin's father slammed his fist against the wall. But fearing a conflict might escalate and leave no one to support his daughter, he gritted his teeth, ran out to withdraw 5,000 yuan, and slapped it into Yongyu's hand. Only then did Yongyu stop obstructing the doctors. Gong Meilin turned her head, tears pooling at the bridge of her nose, forming a tiny puddle. Behind her, her mother was playing with the baby, while through the hospital room's glass door, her father was humbly, almost pleadingly, asking a nurse about postnatal care. For the first time, Gong Meilin realized how her once tall and invincible parents had become bent and frail. Her father came in holding a hot water bottle fashioned from an 4 drip. Her mother tested the temperature against her eyelid before gently pressing it to the 4 tube. The gesture was one Gong Meilin knew well. From childhood, whenever she was sick, there would always be a warm bottle like this to heat her medicine. She closed her eyes as one final tear squeezed out and broke the little puddle. "So, you got divorced?" I blurted out, unable to hold back. I desperately wanted to hear some good news, to know that this delicate, once cherished girl had escaped the emotional vacuum of her marriage. Gong Meilin nodded, then shook her head. She couldn't bear to let her parents worry more about her, nor could she let her newborn daughter grow up without a father. For these reasons and more, Gong Meilin endured the marriage until her daughter turned 4. May 17th. This was a date Gong Meilin would never forget. By then, Yongyu's caring facade from their courtship had long disappeared. That morning, he saw her curled up in pain from menstrual cramps and only sneered. "Get up and make breakfast. Take the kid to school."
"Stop pretending," he said.
Gong Meilin had no energy to argue and whispered, "Can you take Huan to kindergarten today? I'm in too much pain." Yongyu, rummaging through the sofa cushions for a sock he had misplaced, let out a derisive laugh loud enough for her to hear through the bedroom door. "Stop dumping your responsibilities on me." That day, Huan didn't go to kindergarten. Gong Meilin managed to text her teacher to explain before falling unconscious. When she woke again, night had fallen. Her daughter was curled up beside her, one tiny hand resting on her abdomen. On the nightstand sat a bowl of egg tea, the liquid long gone cold. Gong Meilin touched her daughter's small hand, unable to fathom how a 4-year-old managed to boil water, crack eggs, and pour the scalding water into the bowl. "Don't cry, Mommy," Huan comforted her softly. In the cold and dark of the night, mother and daughter clung tightly to each other, sharing warmth through their breaths. "Are you still hurting?" Huan whispered. "Mommy's fine now." "Mommy, are you and Daddy going to get a divorce?" Huan asked cautiously, as though afraid her words might shatter something fragile.
"Who told you that?"
Gong Meilin asked in return. Huan clamped a hand over her mouth, scared. After a long pause, she continued, "Mommy, if you're not happy, then you should leave Daddy." Gong Meilin didn't respond. Lying there, she felt as if she had returned to the hospital bed 4 years ago, hearing her own mother say the same thing, "If you can't go on, then leave." She held her daughter tighter, the warmth of her breath thawing the cold, rigid heart that had hardened over time. "Will you stay with Mommy?" she asked. If Gong Meilin's life were a novel, it should have a perfect ending. A woman breaking free from the shackles of marriage with her adorable daughter, returning to a matriarchal way of life, leaving the man behind to wallow in regret. But Gong Meilin's life isn't a revenge story. Forget punishing a scumbag. She couldn't even escape unscathed. "You wish," Yongyu shouted, his voice rising. "Divorced? Dragging along a brat? You think anyone will want you?" That day ended in a bitter stalemate, with Yongyu hurling venomous insults. It wasn't until Gong's father grabbed a mop handle and forced him out that the confrontation ended. Before leaving, Yongyu stood downstairs yelling, "Your family thinks you're so great? Just a bunch of broke nobodies looking down on me because I'm from the countryside. You'll regret this. You just wait." Believing the Gong family looked down on him, Yongyu caused several disturbances, dumping garbage, breaking locks, and other petty acts of harassment. The most serious incident occurred when he pretended to agree to a divorce, lured Gong Meilin out, and violently dragged her into his car in public view. It was the screams and pleas from inside the car that prompted bystanders to smash the windows and threaten to call the police. Only then did Yongyu relent. When the crowd rescued Gong Meilin, blood trickled from both her nostrils. Eventually, the Gong family's patience wore thin, and they took the matter to Yongyu's workplace. As a rural-born golden boy who had landed a coveted government job, Yongyu couldn't afford to lose his iron rice bowl. Under pressure, he reluctantly agreed to the divorce. After the divorce, Gong Meilin believed that adult disputes shouldn't affect the child, so she never stopped father-daughter visits. So, when the kindergarten teacher informed her that Yongyu had picked up their daughter, she didn't panic, just felt annoyed that he hadn't notified her. Standing at the kindergarten gate, she made her first call. No answer. At 6 p.m., she tried again. Still no response. A creeping fear seeped into her pores, leaving her drenched in cold sweat. She made countless calls, contacting all their mutual friends, but the only answer she got was the same. No one knew where Yongyu was. By 10 p.m., Gong Meilin sent her final ultimatum, typing out each syllable with trembling hands. When she hit send, her entire body shook. 10 minutes. I need to know where Huan is. If not, don't blame me when things turn ugly. Finally, Yongyu responded.
Screw you.
Your family got me fired, so now I've got nothing to lose. Paralyzed with fear, Gong Meilin dropped her phone. Her neck stiffened as she turned to her mother, barely able to squeeze out a choked cry before collapsing to the ground. Yongyu lost his job shortly after the divorce. It was unclear whether it was due to personal misconduct or being scapegoated for someone else, but he was fired. With no wife, no job, and no prospects, Yongyu felt his life was over. He needed someone to blame. He didn't dare resent his boss or begrudge his family for their lack of support. So he blamed it all on Gong Meilin. If her family hadn't caused a scene, how could he have been fired? Since the Gongs had made his life miserable, he decided to return the favor. And he took what mattered most to Gong Meilin, Huan. At this point in her story, Gong Meilin was crying so hard she couldn't catch her breath, pounding her fists against herself. It's my fault. It's all my fault. I knew he was a monster, but I still let my guard down. I let Huan suffer because of me. She tried everything, threatening, pleading, enlisting intermediaries. She said every kind or harsh word she could muster, sent money repeatedly, and exhausted her entire network. Yet Yongyu and the child remained out of reach. She reported him to the police, sobbing and questioning. Aren't you supposed to help people in need? The officer on duty was sympathetic but helpless. They'd seen many mothers like Gong Meilin, all trapped in similar excruciating situations. Unwilling to give up, Gong Meilin turned to the courts. The ruling granted her custody, but Yongyu refused to comply. She appealed, fought through every level of litigation, but Yongyu stayed hidden. Despite all efforts, she never saw her child. Gong Meilin walked the same path as countless other women, stepping on sharp nails and steel plates. They bled and cried, screaming for justice. Everyone could see their pain and anger, yet no one could save them. Half a year after disappearing, Yongyu finally contacted Gong Meilin again. He sent her a video. In the dim footage, Huan looked emaciated, her frail arms and legs covered in bruises. Clutching an unrecognizable lump of blackened food, she mechanically ate, her eyes dull. Speak. Yongyu's voice barked from behind the camera. Huan flinched and timidly whispered, Mommy. Then Yongyu sent a message. You've seen the kid. Isn't it time you sent some child support? Gong Meilin clutched her face, muffling her shattered sobs. Her once precious child, her darling treasure, had been reduced to this in just 6 months. But she held onto a sliver of reason. She knew sending money would only encourage him further. "You'll get nothing unless you bring her back," she replied. "She's my kid too," Yang sneered. "But you know, I've been jobless for months. No money means no food for her. Every day you don't pay, she starves." Another video followed. In it, Huan cried desperately in a corner, calling for her mother as Yang Yu laughed behind the camera. Driven to her breaking point, Gong Meilin transferred him 10,000 yen. "Remember to label it child support," Yang Yu gloated. "Wouldn't want anyone accusing me of extortion." For a brief moment, she considered turning him in, but she couldn't risk it. Her hands were tied, her every move dictated by the man who held her daughter hostage. Lin Yun's determination to endure lasted over half a year. When he was certain Gong Meilin had been completely worn down, he sought a mediator to negotiate. Round after round of discussions led Gong Meilin to compromise. She was required to pay 20,000 yuan per quarter in child support, and any additional expenses were her sole responsibility. In exchange, Lin Yun would send her a video of their child once per quarter. Gong Meilin had no grounds to refuse. Every time she closed her eyes, she envisioned Huan, frail and scrounging through garbage, crying out for her mother. This torment persisted for 2 years. Not a day went by that Gong Meilin didn't miss her child. She explored every possible, sometimes even desperate, means to connect with her child, but the only way to receive even a photo of Huan was to send money. During this time, she became involved with the Purple Ribbon Mothers, a support group for mothers like herself. She joined their public welfare activities and became a source of strength for other mothers who had lost their children. Talking about this brought a rare sparkle to her eyes. "Ms. Lin, it's only through them that I realized I wasn't fighting alone. So many sisters share the same pain, and some have even reunited with their children. If they can do it, then there's hope for me too. And if there's hope, I'm not afraid of anything." Gong Meilin's fearlessness wasn't just talk. It was in her actions. She once intercepted a car where a father was attempting to flee with his child. When confronted, the man held a knife to her abdomen to intimidate her, but she stood her ground. This seemingly fragile woman showed unyielding courage, refusing to back down until the child was safely returned to its mother's arms. Her efforts often left her injured. One of the most severe incidents landed her in the ICU for a month, during which half of her spleen was removed. That day, Gong Meilin had seen a mother's plea for help in the group chat. The situation was nearby, on a highway overpass. Without hesitation, she rushed out the door, spotted the described car, and rammed into it with her own. During the ensuing struggle, Gong Meilin found an opening, swiftly secured the child in her car, and locked the doors. Alone and vulnerable, she negotiated with the furious father outside. The burly man quickly lost patience, beating and kicking her in an attempt to retrieve his keys. But Gong Meilin clung to his leg, refusing to let him move until reinforcements from the Purple Ribbon Group arrived. Only then did she feel relief. As she stood up, she wanted to congratulate the mother, but instead coughed up blood and was taken away by an ambulance. During her recovery, the rescued child and their mother visited her in the hospital. The child, about Huan's age, brought her a bouquet of flowers. Gong Meilin didn't cry when her life was threatened, nor when her injuries were bandaged. But when she saw the child, she couldn't stop the tears. She knelt, gently hugged the child, and whispered Huan's name over and over. The child said nothing but hugged her back. As they parted, the child waved goodbye, saying in a clear, sweet voice, "Goodbye, Meilin Mama." Recounting this story, Gong Meilin beamed with pride. She lifted her shirt to show me her scars, recounting her experiences as though they were badges of honor. "Why?" I couldn't help but reach out to touch one of the raised scars. Her abdomen bore a bruise the size of a bowl, a mark that had lingered for years. Was it worth it? Gong Meilin froze. She pulled her shirt back down and bit her lip. It's worth it. I just think, if I ever find Juan's whereabouts, someone will help me too. In her phone was the Purple Ribbon Mothers support group chat, which now had over 300 members. In 2 years, more mothers had joined, though some left after reuniting with their children. They continuously encouraged and supported one another. Gong Meilin had been injured numerous times, always leading the charge, not just out of empathy for shared struggles, but also for the hope of her own Juan. For the day when these 300 sisters would fight alongside her. Gong Meilin purchased a second-hand car and traveled nationwide in search of Lin Yun. She became a ride-hailing driver, handing every passenger a printed card with her contact information and Juan's photo, unwilling to miss any opportunity to find her child. She had persisted in this for 2 years. After paying child support, every remaining penny she earned was donated. She believed that by spreading kindness, the goodwill would eventually bless her child. Her elderly parents felt her pain, but also understood her determination. Though they were too old to contribute much, they sponsored 2 children and prayed daily. It wasn't superstition or ignorance. It was desperation. Ordinary methods couldn't save the Gong family from their suffering, leaving them with only faith to cling to. Gong Meilin's tightly wounded nerves eventually snapped, pushing her to a state of delirium. Mistaking another child for her own, she embraced him as though her life depended on it. The mother, moved by Gong Meilin's story, wiped her tears and set the child down. Little Bao, Annie hugged you, because she likes you. Don't be scared, the woman said gently. The child seemed to understand and nodded, taking Gong Meilin's hand. Auntie, I don't blame you anymore. Gong Meilin hugged the boy again, listening to the steady thump of his heartbeat. She thought of her Juan, who had once nestled against her like this. I expressed my gratitude to the woman on Gong Meilin's behalf. She waved it off. It was all just a misunderstanding. My name is Hong Li. If you ever need help, please don't hesitate to contact me. After bringing Gong Meilin out of the police station, I took her to a nearby diner. She shyly handed me the menu, but I shook my head. I'm not hungry. Gong Meilin didn't insist. She ordered the cheapest fried rice on the menu, costing only 7 yuan. When the food arrived, she devoured it hungrily. I checked the time, it was only 4 p.m. Embarrassed, Gong Meilin paused. I usually only eat lunch. I was at the police station earlier and didn't get a chance to eat. I knew she lived frugally, but I hadn't realized how much she deprived herself. Between her part-time jobs and chasing children with the Purple Ribbon Mothers, the physical toll of her lifestyle was unsustainable. I wanted to advise her but held back, afraid it would sound too heavy. For Gong Meilin, this self-imposed suffering was penance. She couldn't forgive herself for the negligence that had led to her separation from her daughter. This isn't your fault. It's Lin Yun's responsibility. Her hand, mid-scoop, froze. She then resumed eating, stuffing her cheeks until they bulged. Swallowing hard, she teared up. It's my fault. I failed as a mother, she said through a mouthful of rice. While she was in the restroom, I slipped 1,000 yuan into her bag, fearing she wouldn't accept a bank transfer. I had deliberately exchanged cash with a shopkeeper for this purpose. As I stepped out of the diner, Gong Meilin chased after me. She returned the money. Ms. Lin, I don't need your pity. No, it's not pity. I quickly tried to explain. She interrupted. I understand, but I don't need it. I can work and endure hardship. My parents have pensions and don't need my support. There are too many sisters out there fighting alone. They need this money more than I do. Instead of giving it to me, please donate it. Half a month after parting ways with Gong Meilin, I dedicated all my efforts to the Caring for Purple Ribbon Mothers initiative. Beyond raising awareness, legal education, and providing free legal aid, we successfully raised significant funds. Every penny was managed by a dedicated team, with details disclosed transparently to all donors. As an experienced Purple Ribbon Mother, Gong Meilin became actively involved in the campaign. She inspired many with her actions and guided others with her experiences. Hong Li also emerged as a crucial member of the initiative. Her extensive connections and influential presence brought much-needed attention to the cause, helping more people understand and recognize this group. Everything seemed to be moving in a positive direction. But at this very moment, I received a call from Gong Meilin. Her voice was hoarse, laden with indescribable exhaustion. "Ms. Lin, I can't take it anymore." At the beginning of the month, Gong Meilin had transferred money to Yangyu on time, but the promised video of her daughter failed to arrive. Later that afternoon, Yangyu finally sent a message. "Everything is more expensive now. Child support needs to go up, add another 10,000. This is blackmail." Over the phone, Gong Meilin trembled with rage. "Fine, then I won't take the money. Clearly, raising a child is something I did wrong," Yangyu replied and then cut off all communication. Desperate and at her wit's end, Gong Meilin sought advice from her support group. Many urged her not to send the money. One of the most experienced mothers in the group spoke up. "Meilin, think carefully. If you send the money, you're turning your child into his bargaining chip. Kidnappers don't treat hostages kindly. He's still using the child to extort money from you now, which means he's unlikely to harm the child unless absolutely necessary. You can't lose your composure." The elder woman's insight helped Meilin regain her rationality, but Yangyu was far more unhinged than anyone anticipated. On September 15th, Meilin finally received a video. But one glance, and her heart was gripped with agony. In the video, her daughter's eyes were lifeless. Flies buzzed around her, and there was a festering wound on her thigh, the size of a hand, oozing fluid mixed with pus. "No money, no food. I can't afford burn ointment either," Yangyu remarked nonchalantly. Those words forced Meilin into submission. "Ms. Lin, I really don't know what to do anymore." Her voice on the phone was hollow. "Why is it that other mothers can get their children back, but my Huahuan has to suffer like this? Today he's asking for another 10,000 yuan, and I can give it to him. But what happens when he demands more than I can afford? Ms. Lin, what am I supposed to do? My child is still in his hands. He's a shameless scoundrel. He's lost his job. He doesn't care about his reputation anymore. What if one day he decides to sell Huahuan? I've gone to the courts and the police so many times. The judgment has long been issued, but all they say is that Yangyu refuses to comply. What am I supposed to do?" I couldn't answer Meilin's questions. As I delved deeper into interviews and investigations with purple ribbon mothers, I felt increasingly powerless. Their struggles revealed a systemic gap in the law where individuals seemed insignificant against a chasm so vast. In the paradox of law, it states that any law, the moment it is enacted, becomes outdated. This is the shared frustration of legal practitioners and victims alike. I could have thrown some formalities at Meilin to appease her, or confused her with technical jargon, but all words felt so feeble, utterly incapable of soothing a mother's broken heart. In the end, all I could do was dryly respond, "Meilin, let's think of something together. Maybe we can approach this from the angle of child abuse." Meilin reported the incident to the police again. A sympathetic female officer privately advised her, "It's more effective to report this in the jurisdiction where the incident occurred. Applying for a cross-regional investigation is too complex, and the timeline is too long. The child can't wait that long." Of course, Meilin knew this. Her inability to locate Yangyu was precisely why she had been traveling across the country in vain. "I've begged so many people.
Who can help me?"
Just one we can't is all it takes to dismiss me. The world is covered in surveillance. Information is transparent. Bank transactions can be tracked. Consumption areas pinpointed. How is it possible that he still can't be found?" Meilin raged. At first, Meilin had gone to Yangyu's parents' home to make a scene. But his parents remained indifferent, chewing sunflower seeds and spitting out shells. "We don't know anything. If you can't keep an eye on your own child, that's not our problem." Meilin, trembling with fury, smashed everything she could reach. But Yongyu's parents fought back just as viciously, shoving and cursing her with every insult they could muster. You couldn't keep your own husband, divorced and used goods, had a daughter who's just a burden. Did you really think anyone would care? A mother who can't even protect her own child isn't even as good as a sow in the village. And now you dare come here and cause trouble? You ruined my son's job. Your family owes us compensation. The former in-laws knew exactly how to cut her to the bone with their words. Thrown out by the pair, Meilin collapsed outside their home, where a crowd had gathered to watch. Sensing the audience, Yongyu's parents changed their tone, plopping themselves onto the ground dramatically. We're just two poor old folks. We gave everything to marry off our son, and now his ex-wife has come to beat us up. She's ruined our peace, and it's all her fault he lost his job. Heaven help us. Grieving the loss of her child, surrounded by lies and distorted truths and the whispers of onlookers, Meilin nearly fainted. Her final call to the police got her arrested instead, charged with provoking trouble and detained for 5 days. Meilin's parents, carrying gifts and forced smiles, tried to appease the very people who had driven their daughter to despair. Yet Yongyu's parents wouldn't relent until Meilin was locked away. In the past 2 years, scenes like this had played out countless times. In fact, Meilin had spent more time in detention than at home. Ms. Lin, my poor Huahuan. Her father doesn't care for her, and all she has is a useless mother who can't fight for justice or save her. I had 1,000 things I could tell Meilin, that we must follow legal procedures, uphold fairness, and avoid breaking laws or resorting to violence. Did Meilin not already know all of this? All of it was nothing more than a desperate mother's irrational, frantic cries for help. On the phone, Meilin fell into a long silence. Then her voice hardened, dripping with vengeful resolve. If the real criminals can't be punished, then I'll take justice into my own hands. Don't do anything foolish. Think about your parents and your child, I pleaded. I'm doing this for my child, Meilin screamed, her voice piercing with anguish. Ms. Lin, thank you for everything you've done for me over the years, but I can't hold on any longer. From then on, I lost contact with Gong Meilin. After several attempts to inquire about her, I only heard bits and pieces from others. Some said she went to Hubei, others said she went to Xinjiang. No one could confirm where exactly she had gone. The only thing I was sure of was that she had never stopped, that she had never given up on the search for her daughter. 4 months later, on New Year's Day, I received another phone call from Gong Meilin. Mr. Lin, thank you for your help. Happy holidays. Her voice sounded a bit lighter, but for some reason, I felt uneasy. Where have you been these past few days? I couldn't reach you anywhere. Don't worry, I'm fine. There was a crackling noise on the line, and her tone was unclear, though it seemed to have a hint of a smile. Mr. Lin, everything is going to end now. Before I could say anything else, she hung up. January 3rd, the holiday was over. I received a message from the police. An armed thug had stormed into a kindergarten and taken a child hostage. As the police representative, I squeezed my way into the crowd surrounding the kindergarten, preparing to negotiate with the thug. Amidst the commotion, I saw Gong Meilin inside the kindergarten. She had light makeup on, her hair tied up, and was wearing a pale blue windbreaker. She was gripping the child's arm tightly, standing in the front, with security guards holding steel forks surrounding her. Gong Meilin looked resolutely at the crowd, unafraid, unshaken. She held onto the child's arm and moved forward, step by step. At that moment, I finally understood why they had called me to negotiate. I shouted, "Don't act impulsively. I understand how you feel, but the child is innocent." Gong Meilin's eyes were red, and her lips trembled uncontrollably. Who isn't innocent? Should I just suffer in silence? Should my elderly parents have to suffer with me? Or is my Huanhuan not innocent? Does she deserve to starve, to be beaten and scolded? I understand, but you can't take extreme measures. I inched closer. Think about Huanhuan. There's still hope. If you go to prison, Huanhuan will only have to suffer with Yongyu. Can you bear that? For a moment, Gong Meilin seemed to waver, but then her madness grew. The dark barrel of the gun swung dangerously near the child's temple. The gun was unusual, likely modified or assembled herself, making it even more dangerous. I feared that even the slightest movement would cause it to misfire. Mr. Lin, you understand my situation, so that's why I've called you today. My demand is to find Yang Yu and forcibly bring my child back. Okay, we can do that. With surveillance everywhere now, and even bank cards traceable, don't act impulsively. I slowly moved closer, trying to calm her down. Don't move, Gong Meilin sharply ordered. In the next second, the dark barrel of the gun pointed skyward, and a loud bang echoed, followed by screams from the crowd. There were no splashes of blood, no fallen child. In that moment, photos fell from the sky, covering the ground. I bent down to pick one up. It recorded the suffering of Gong Meilin and over 300 other mothers from the Purple Ribbon Movement. It documented their struggles and broken hopes, the origins of each scar on Gong Meilin's body, the arrogance of Yang Yu, and the wounds on Huan Huan. Onlookers picked up the photos, reading them voluntarily. A rare silence fell over the crowd. Gong Meilin took off her jacket and fearlessly displayed her scars to the public. Then, dozens of women, some young, some old, walked out of the school building. They were all mothers who had lost their children, and they, too, showed their pain to the crowd, exposing their most vulnerable and desperate sides. Like Gong Meilin, they were all women pushed to the edge. They had no choice but to orchestrate a grand, shocking, and terrifying violent act. Only in this way could they be seen by the public. They walked this path voluntarily, using evil to seek hope. All they wanted was justice. I spent New Year's Eve at the Gong family's home. The 5 of us gathered around, enjoying a hot pot meal together. Gong's father proudly held up the dipping sauce bowl. Mr. Lin, try it, my sauce is the best. Gong's mother rolled her eyes and placed some lamb into my bowl. Don't listen to him bragging. This is store-bought. He just added some lamb broth to it. Huan Huan shyly hid in Gong Meilin's arms, watching cartoons. Though she showed some signs of trauma, Gong Meilin firmly believed that, with her mother's love, Huan Huan would eventually become a lively and cheerful girl. As the Spring Festival Gala began, the 4 of us raised our glasses to celebrate. Huan Huan held a cup of juice and clinked glasses with me. Then, she tilted her head back and drank the whole cup in one go, looking up at Gong Meilin with a pitiful gaze. No, you've had enough drinks for today. Gong Meilin refused. Huan Huan said nothing, just gazed at her, and Gong Meilin, seeing the pleading look, softened. All right, just one last cup. The dinner table was full of jokes and laughter. The mood was lively and warm. On TV, the familiar song, Unforgettable Tonight, played. Gong Meilin, already tipsy, held Huan Huan tightly, tears streaming down her face. She kissed her child with all her might, afraid that, the next moment, she would wake up and realize it was all just a dream. It's all over now. I patted her shoulder. From now on, it will all be good days. She nodded. On the day of the kindergarten hostage situation, no police took Gong Meilin away. Everyone who was there listening to her speech was moved to tears. It was only after the incident that Hong Li appeared, and I realized that everything that had happened that day had been rehearsed. Hong Li had noticed that Gong Meilin was emotionally unstable and had prevented her from doing something rash. She then planned a high-profile event to spread awareness about the Purple Ribbon Mothers, something that would capture the public's attention. It needed to be explosive and eye-catching. She decided to use the kindergarten anti-terrorism drill as a platform for a campaign against the forced separation of children, and with many connections, from the district to the city to the province, Hong Li managed to get approval. The event was scheduled for the first working day after the New Year's holiday. Gong's parents attended the event, as did their sponsored students, the police who had assisted her over the past 2 years, and the community workers who had often visited Gong's parents when Gong Meilin was away. Everyone who had helped Gong Meilin, and everyone she had helped, was present. Their presence was the most powerful testimony, the best promotional material. They told everyone about a mother's broken heart and unyielding love. They explained how difficult and painful life had been for this group of women. Many bystanders filmed the event and uploaded the videos online, hitting a nerve with the public. In just a few minutes, the video's views surpassed 10,000, and millions of people began following this cause. The authorities decided to use Gong Meilin as a case study. With the power of the people, Yang Yu's whereabouts were quickly located and enforcement was carried out. During the operation, Yang Yu resisted and even injured a public official, which led to his imprisonment for several days. Meanwhile, Gong Meilin contacted a lawyer and gathered all the transfer records and photos of Huan's injuries, also having Huan undergo a medical evaluation and see a psychologist. She swore to put Yang Yu behind bars no matter what. Gong Meilin sold her used car and donated all the proceeds to other Purple Ribbon mothers. She swiftly wrapped up her past and found a new job as an accountant. She also ran a social media account to keep the public updated on their progress and to offer support and advice to other mothers in the movement. After the event, I stood up to leave. Gong Meilin insisted on seeing me off. Under the streetlight, the melting snow reflected light on her face, casting a soft glow that enveloped her in a gentle mist, radiating the unique calm of a mother. Mr. Lin, thank you. It's your encouragement and the relentless reporting about our group that kept me going until now. It made us think of this approach. And the police who helped me, their care for my parents allowed me to search for Huan with peace of mind. And Li, if it weren't for her efforts, I might still be enduring the pain of separation from Huan. Gong Meilin held her child, a small part of her waist exposed. The scars were still visible, but the bruises had already faded. I tucked a strand of hair behind her ear. Gong Meilin no longer looked as worn out as before. Her eyes sparkled with the hope for a bright future. As I got into the car, Li sent me a New Year greeting. In the video, Xiaobao's soft voice wished me a Happy New Year. Once, I had asked Li why she went to such lengths to help Gong Meilin. To her, Gong Meilin was just a stranger, even someone she had once had conflicts with. Li unlocked her phone, and the screensaver showed a middle-aged woman holding a child. She said, "I grew up in a single-parent family. After my parents divorced, my dad took me in, but he found me burdensome and left me with my grandmother. I don't remember much about my childhood, but I remember my mom crying when she came to see me. She promised she would take me away. She kept her word. She really took me with her. During the hardest times, we slept in a stall, and I washed up in public restrooms. No one helped her. She had to carry me on the train, sometimes standing the entire way when there was no seat. I know how hard it is to be a mother. Now that I can help, I do it for anyone I can." Li looked at the photo on her phone, her expression soft. She had carried the pain of her mother's struggles in her heart for over 20 years, and finally, 20 years later, she helped another mother find her way out. Outside the car window, fireworks exploded in the sky. Xiaobao's voice echoed in the video, wishing me a Happy New Year. The year ended, and Gong Meilin's long-lasting storm finally subsided, leaving only new beginnings ahead.